Okay.
Did it tweet to you? Hang on. I'm just making sure that we're live. Okay, we are live. Welcome back to the Holler, everybody. Justin, Holler co-founder. We are tnholler.com, at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. Follow us if you can. And you can also set reminders on Twitter and also on Facebook when we go live with these live stream interviews that we do. We are a progressive news site here in Tennessee. We appreciate all the support people have given us. We just actually expanded this week to at Memphis Holler and at Knoxville Holler. So follow those if you guys are in those areas. It's pretty exciting. Unfortunately, a lot of news publications and media publications are shrinking right now because of the shrinking ad dollars, but we're excited to be able to say that we're growing. And the only way we're able to do that is because of the support of the people in our audience. So we really appreciate everybody's support. tnholler.com is where you can subscribe and support. Today, we're talking to somebody who I was just telling him I'm a fan of. Ryan Cooper is a national correspondent for The Week. He has a podcast called Left Anchor. He's a progressive guy, and he's got opinions that you should read. So follow him. He's at Ryan L. Cooper on Twitter. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Pretty well. Weather finally got nice the last couple of days, so I've been enjoying that.
Where are you? I don't know where
Philly.
You are. I just realized. Where are you? Philly. Okay, that makes sense. Well, it's nice to meet you. I thought we could start by talking a little bit about the post office, because I once read a piece of yours that I thought was really poignant, and it's now a topic of discussion today. And I think it's sort of a microcosm of a lot of the bigger issues that we're facing right now. So can you, first of all, I think your story started with where you grew up. So tell us a little bit about that, and that's relevant to this conversation.
Oh, yeah. So I grew up in deep rural Utah, near Capitol Reef National Park, in a town of about less than 200 people. And, the post office was a sort of central institution there, like probably the most important sort of government. I mean, probably the only government building of any kind in the town. All of the other sort of state services were in neighboring towns. Back as a joke once, my folks were river guides in Grand Canyon for many years, and they rode these boats called dories, which are usually wooden, or sometimes aluminum or plastic. But so one of her friends, I believe in Flagstaff, once tried to send her a letter by just putting Dory, Lori, Tory, what's the name of the town, on it. No address, no zip code, no state or anything like that. But they figured it out, and they delivered it to her in, I think, less than a week. And it was, it was just a sort of miraculous, like functioning bureaucracy that, it was, I mean, probably took somebody 5 minutes of work to figure it out. Where's Tory? Okay, send it there. And then the postmaster in Tory, of course, knew every single person in the town, and so sent it along. But yeah, it's something that people take for granted, and even when it doesn't work that well, it works, pretty well. Like, the mail comes most of the time, even after decades of austerity. And 20 years ago, it worked much, much better than it does now.
Well, I just want people to know we can see their comments on Facebook and Twitter. We got a bunch of people watching right now. If you guys have any questions for Ryan, feel free to write them underneath this as an @reply or in the comments. So you mentioned Utah, you mentioned the Grand Canyon. I think that's the thing that people probably realize, but the post office reaches everywhere. And something like the post office going away, the people that would be hurt the most are the people in the rural parts of these states, in rural Utah, rural Tennessee, who count on the post office to get to them. Prices would go up. So can you talk a little bit about how the post office provides a service to the rural parts of the country that I think a lot of people often take for granted?
Yeah, absolutely. The post office, everyone's saying, oh, famously, they've been losing, a lot of money over the past few years, and it's gotten to a crisis point because people aren't sending nearly as much mail as they used to before the pandemic. And part of that is because in 2006, the Congress required the post office to fund its pension system like 75 years in advance. So they're making payments into this pension account for people, future employees who haven't even been born yet. But insofar as the post office has a sort of structural expense to it, it's because it has a mandate to provide uniform service at a uniform price. A first class letter costs the same whether you're sending it across the street or you're sending it to Alaska, where the post office has to get like a float plane and drive out there and toss a sack of mail out onto the dock in some far-flung village.
And that mandate is constitutional.
Yeah, well, right. The mandate's legal, and I mean, I don't think the specific uniform service requirement is in the Constitution, but the post office is. And the idea of this is to say, okay, post office, we're going to give you a monopoly on first class mail, and you're the only institution that can use the post office box. But in return, what you're going to do is give the entire citizenry access to the same type of thing, to sort of bind the country together. There's a political objective to it that is egalitarian, and you might say a sort of small r Republican, to say that we're all one people, we should all be able to send a letter no matter where we choose to live. And a lot of innovations in post office history are or rather, a lot of the sort of like daily structure of our environment in our cities and towns is stuff that the post office came up with. Stuff like addresses. There were no uniform addresses before the post office developed that so that they could deliver mail. Mail delivery didn't used to be a thing. You used to have to go to the post office personally and collect stuff. And until like relatively recently, I think, within the past century, there didn't used to be package delivery for most rural locations either. And so, that it's like part of the fabric of the country, and it's one of the few institutions that is, you would say sort of commensurate with a sort of civilized, functioning, wealthy society. And so you see why conservatives and neoliberals hate it. It's a walking, even today, still functioning quite well. It's a sort of walking proof that their ideology is bogus, and that
so
you actually can. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to drill down a little bit on that, what is the ideology? The ideology is essentially that government is bad and we need to privatize everything.
Yeah, that the government, the government should not be doing anything that the private, businesses could conceivably do. And so, we need to privatize everything. We need privatize Social Security, get all that out into the stock market. Like everything, sort of basic ideology of capitalism is like everything needs to be channeled through the market. And market institutions should be where you get your money, where you get your retirement savings, and what you rely on for everything. But the reality is that the government can do things very well. Even in this jalopy scrap heap of a country, we still have a lot of institutions which are not owned by private businesses, and they function as well or better than most private businesses. People complain about the post office, but I would even, in my part of Philly, West Philly, the post office is pretty ramshackle. but I would absolutely prefer to deal with the post office than my internet service provider, Verizon. I mean, the difference in service and quality and price, especially, doesn't bear comparison. And that goes back to what would happen if you were to privatize the post office and or basically hand it to like UPS and FedEx. It'll cost you $50 to send a letter, across the country, because that's what they'll charge you. If you go to FedEx and you say, how much is it going to cost me to send a letter? And they'll calculate it out. They'll say, this is what it would cost in terms of resources, and that's the market. And so hand over your $50. And
right. And this is a microcosm of every issue that we face. It's Republicans telling us that government can't do these things, doesn't do them well, and privatization and the free market, quote unquote, which actually isn't free, is the answer. And they want us to believe that if left up to the free market, prices will come down, service will be better, and everybody will be a lot happier. But we've seen, look at our healthcare system. Look at what they're trying to do to the education system. It's the same exact fight, just on different frontiers. And the post office is just another one where they vilify everything as socialism. They tear it down. They tell us it doesn't work because the post office isn't donating their campaigns and isn't run by their friends. And so, socialism, this is that socialism thing, right? Isn't that exactly what this is?
Yeah, it's an ideological, and a sort of moral framework that private business should rule the country, that they should decide what happens in politics, and the market should be the axis of like your entire life. Yeah, and it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats who have been leery of this kind of thing. And the thing about the post office, and the reason I like it so much, it's because of its function in the United States. There are like privatized or semi-privatized postal services that work, reasonably okay. I don't think any of them bears comparison to the post office, especially in scope. The USPS handles like 47% of all the international mail in the world. So a lot of those services, just like UPS and FedEx, by the way, are piggybacking on the post office infrastructure. How do like 40% of Amazon packages get delivered the last mile? It's the post office. Mm-hmm. But even in those countries, markets can work more or less well. But what you don't see is the kind of thoroughgoing attack on any kind of public provision of any kind that results, to get, as I say, try to cram everyone into the private market. Even in, I think, Denmark, the post office is mostly private, but in every one of those countries where that's the case, they also have a gigantic state sector that does all sorts of things, big complicated bureaucracies that are doing, healthcare, and they're they've got mass unions and elaborate bureaucracies to deal with stuff like a coronavirus pandemic. That's something that we're just not even going to try to do here. And so, the post office is less important in those countries because they don't have this same kind of tradition of tearing up their own sort of social like support systems by the roots. And so I think it's just very important to sort of try to preserve and cherish those lingering shreds of stuff that we still have, like the post office or the Tennessee Valley Authority or Amtrak. Amtrak is pretty lousy service in a lot of the country, but it's the only passenger rail we have. And, I think it's our obligation to try to do better, with all of those things and build new ones.
Well, it seems like there's a direct line from this fight to the argument about investing in ourselves, investing in our people, making sure that you may use the word austerity, making sure that we're not, following the tax cuts for the top program, cuts for everybody else, priorities. With this, we need to defend the idea of, programs that we don't expect to make a ton of money, but do expect to contribute a lot to society. And right now, because of the way things have gone, especially during this pandemic, we see that we've really been losing that fight, and too many people are struggling while so few people have so many of the resources. So, this is another one of those battlegrounds where 600,000 people work for the post office, so many veterans. It's a bastion of inclusivity and tolerance, and historically has really been a place of equality. And if we start to lose arguments like this and let them make the cases, and not just Republicans, you're right, but Democrats as well, that we need to privatize everything, that everything is about the numbers, that there is no such thing as a human benefit to these things, we're going to keep going down the road we've been going down for 40 years. And I wanted to touch on the project that you put out not too long ago, which is the People's Policy Project. And what was the takeaway from that? A lot of it seemed to have to do with inequality and the way that we treat workers and the poor in this country. What did you learn from your People's Policy Project, which is pinned to the top of your feed at Ryan L. Cooper?
Yeah, so this paper, it's called The Leisure Agenda, and it's basically just trying to say we should cut working hours in the United States. If you look at the data back in the 70s, America was sort of middle of the pack in terms of the number of hours worked on average, across the workforce. And since that time, in almost every other rich country, those hours have fallen by quite a lot, 10, 20, even 30% in some cases. And when you sort of dig into why that happened, basically, rich countries like France, Denmark, Germany, Thailand, South Korea, they instituted more policies to enable people to take more time off. Stuff like paid family leave, especially stuff like paid vacation, mandated lower, weekly working hours. I think they're down to 37.5 is the official weekly work hour in Norway and some other Nordic countries. And so, it's sort of on a surface level just saying like, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have more free time? Everyone likes time off, of course. What if we had a 4-day work week? I didn't include that in the paper, but I think that's absolutely an objective we should aim for. But it's also about the sort of like deeper nature of the economy, the system of economic production, and what the point of it all is. In the sort of McConnell, neoliberal Democratic Joe Biden framework that we've been talking about, the point of the economy is to make money for rich people. And it's also to enable their political domination so that they get to tell you what hours you're going to work and what you're going to be paid for that work. And they also get to tell the politicians what policies are going to be passed. And so, you look at like the GDP in this country, and it's much higher than most of those other European countries I've been talking about. Even though if you measure it per hour, it's pretty much exactly the same. Us, France, and Germany are pretty much neck and neck in terms of GDP per hour. Ours is higher because we work more, and we work more because we have refused to implement any of those policies to add more leisure time so that we can make more money at the end of the day for Wall Street. Because, as you've been talking about, inequality in this country has exploded since the 1970s. And, wages for like the bottom, 70, 80% of people have been more or less stagnant. Some people have gone up a bit. The bottom 50% has gone down quite a lot. And where did it all go? Well, it went to the top. And so, but if you're thinking about the economy as a sort of collective system to provide sort of material services, the stuff that we need to go about our daily lives, as GDP keeps going up, as we have more production, well, hell, why don't we work less? If we could work, if we can produce more per hour worked, if our productivity is increasing, well, we could just have more production, which can go to the hands of the rich. So we could restructure that, but at the same time, we could just say, well, we'll have more free time. And I think the choice in the European countries has been broadly a mix of the two things. We'll keep sort of the wealth ticking up a bit, but why not have free time? It's not like people were poor in the 1970s, that the U.S. was like some grinding poverty-stricken nation. There was plenty to go around, even though some people were left out, but like they could have been brought in. And so broadly, you think about the deep level of what we're trying to do as a country with our sort of daily activities. We are so rich in this country. We have our national wealth is off this charts, higher than anyone else, compared, with the exception of a few oil-rich countries, Norway or Dubai, and so on. And we have way more than enough for everyone to have a very secure material standard of living and plenty of free time to spend doing the stuff that they want to do aside from work. And that's just a question of rejiggering the labor system such that that people have and I think the standard in Denmark and in other European countries, 5 weeks of paid vacation per year. And so in Denmark, basically in July, the whole economy sort of shuts down or goes sort of into a slow motion period, and everybody goes down to Italy and Greece and other places to just hang out. And it's like this is the good life. This is what 250 years of grinding work are supposed to enable us to do. As John Maynard Keynes said in 1930, an essay about the economic possibilities of our grandchildren. He said in 100 years we would be able to have just lives of unimaginable luxury compared to what people experienced then. And he was right about the economic progress, but he was wrong about the politics. And the politics just, that has to come in the form of overthrowing the power of, the capitalist class to dictate terms to everyone else.
Well, so here we are in a pandemic, and all of these things are being held up in front of us in a mirror for the it's impossible to avoid. We see what it means when people lose their jobs and how employer-based insurance is not the answer. We see how on the edge so much of this country lives. It seems like if we were going to get to a place where we could fight for the things that you're talking about on a regular basis in your columns and in that paper, this would be the moment. Do you have any hope that we actually do?
Well, yes and no. I think the most encouraging thing has been the outbreak of labor militancy. We're seeing a lot of sort of wildcat strikes, or work stoppages or slowing, people protesting for better pay and better working conditions. Often in a sense, not just of like, I want hazard pay for risking my life, but in the case of like Amazon workers who are working in contaminated warehouses, saying like, hey, we shouldn't, it's irresponsible for us to be working in these conditions because we might be infecting these packages, and we might be turning this warehouse into a transmission vector for the disease. And that's great to see, because it's not only about sort of self-interest, but it's about solidarity. It's about trying to care for yourself and the whole population at the same time. And that, you look at why the US is so different than it was in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and why it's so different than many European countries today. I think the main reason politically is that the labor movement has been all but killed.
Yeah.
And you know, the unions have been and are across the world like the institution of left-wing politics, and they were killed for a reason. They were killed for exactly that reason. You know, the bosses want to dictate terms. And so if if we are seeing a resurgence of labor militancy, labor organizing, that could possibly inaugurate, a new, maybe a transition of like union density, union membership, maybe bottoming out, starting to climb up. There's no indication of that yet, but it could happen. These in the 30s, after they passed the National Labor Relations Act, there was a huge explosion of new unions that just happened all the time. It's like these things can gather strength very quickly. On the other hand, national politics is extremely depressing. You look at Joe Biden, he's a guy who has been squarely in the neoliberal tradition of the Democrats for his entire career, basically. Author of the infamous bankruptcy bill, or one of them. Big austerity guy, saying we need to cut Medicare and Social Security. And the almost eager willingness of Democrats to line up behind someone who is bad on the merits and also extremely old and clearly lost a step mentally. I think it bears a eerie similarity to the situation in 2008. The economy was collapsing, and that handed Democrats huge majorities in Congress, which they proceeded to squander by not fixing the economy sufficiently. And it's very easy for me to see that happening again in 2021 rather, and going into the 2022 midterms with unemployment still really high and them losing to Republicans again. But maybe they'll kick out Biden and replace him with someone who's still in possession of his or her faculties.
Well, let me just say, I just want to present the other side of this here. I mean, I was a Bernie guy openly.
Yeah.
It didn't work out.
No.
And here we are. I believe very strongly that Biden is flawed, no question. This allegation stuff aside, which I don't even want to touch on, I think everybody should evaluate and make their own decision about that. I think that there's a lot left to shake out when it comes to that issue. On the merits, though, you're right. I mean, he has a lot of baggage, but he happens to be running against a guy who, is one of the worst people who ever walked the face of the earth. I mean,
no,
like
it's true.
This is a terrible, terrible human being we have in the White House right now. And, I mean, I am shocked that a lot of the Biden baggage didn't weigh him down more, frankly, but it didn't. And here we are. And I just think the choice is clear. We just have to, it's not 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's, Biden has baggage. Trump is a terrible person. And,
no, I agree with that. People may agree or disagree. I'm saying, I say voting is a sort of personal thing, and I'm not going to bully people into it. I live in a swing state, so I will grudgingly vote for Biden. It's not it's a small act for just one vote. But if I wanted to look at a silver lining, you look at Biden's career, he's been an opportunist for a long time. He came in the 70s talking a big game about civil rights. When that became unpopular, he turned against it, and it seems maybe possible that he will perceive that shifting to the left is politically advantageous and going for some kind of populism. I think that's pretty unlikely, but unless they do swap him out with someone, it seems like the only sort of glimmering of hope in terms of national politics. And that says hopefully he will hire some people other than the people he's surrounded himself with so far. Anita Dunn, Bruce Reed, who's one of the authors of Welfare Reform in 1996,
No,
Larry Summers.
right.
So
It's not looking hopeful in that from that perspective. However, the conversation has shifted. The numbers have shifted. The policies that are popular now are policies that would have been considered fringe even 8 years ago. Even Obama has said he would have run a different campaign if he was running now. So I think in some ways you're right that his lack of ideology is an opportunity and an advantage. And, in that way, I think that progressives should stand their ground and push and kick and scream and make noise and make sure that, policies line up how, they push things as much as they possibly can. But at the end of the day, when they get in that voting booth, I just hope that they'll make the right decision. And honestly, I think they will, because one of the narratives that is overblown in my mind is that Bernie people didn't support Hillary last time. They actually did. More Bernie people voted for Hillary than Hillary people voted for Barack. And people don't talk about that. The narrative is that, oh, Bernie just took his ball and went home. He did 40 events for her. It's just not what happened. So, and oh, by the way, he won with independents. Those aren't Democrats. So, you can't just sit around and go, hey, fall in line. They weren't in line to begin with a lot of the time. So, I think that's a more nuanced conversation. But I have felt from day one that this election is about Donald Trump. And I feel like it almost didn't matter who we nominated. Whoever that nominee was either going to win or lose, the same, because this is about, you're either coming out to vote for or against Donald Trump. I'm not saying sit back and have that be all you talk about and let that carry the day. Like, we have to do the work and care about the right things. But this is a referendum on that guy. And so, that's what's going to happen, I think.
Yeah. It's always a referendum on the incumbent. And it's looking to me almost certain that the pandemic is not going to be solved by November. Like, we could see another second wave of outbreaks when the weather gets cold again. That's what happened with Spanish flu in 1918. And the economy will probably be in the toilet. And when that happens, almost every time the incumbent loses.
Right.
And this is one of the depressing things about people saying that Biden's a safe choice. Like, it's in those circumstances, it's like Great Depression levels of unemployment. You could run anyone. Me or you could beat Trump in that circumstance almost certainly.
Exactly. And I don't think he was the safe choice. Sorry, go ahead.
No. That's the whole like electability thing is such a crock. And but I think that, the one sort of window of opportunity I could see with supposing Biden does win, and he does surround himself with all these neoliberal vampires, there may be an opportunity to engage those people, not on the question of like, whether or not like it's just to have Medicare for all, but whether or not their types of policies work out according to the objectives they supposedly want. Like, a big one is growth. Do you want, neoliberals always say, oh, we got to have high growth. And that's why they say we need to cut, welfare and stuff like that. We got to push more people into the labor market so we can increase labor supply, increase GDP. Well, what happened after the 2008 financial crisis? And the stimulus was only about half or maybe less than half as big as it needed to be. And we had this foreclosure program that was a complete catastrophe, caused, or failed to prevent like 10 million foreclosures or people losing their homes through some other way. Growth relative to the 1945-2007 average fell by about 40%, and it has never recovered. So today, well, especially today, but even before the coronavirus thing hit, the gap between our output and our potential output, or what the previous trend line had been, was bigger than it was in 2008. And so, I think there's a real argument that could be made there, that if you are posing as a very serious person who talks about the hard choices that need to happen to keep our economy back on its legs and so on, one thing you won't do is a lot of austerity, and that's bad both in terms of like the production thing, which has its problems, but I'm just talking about a potential line of attack here. But also in terms of politics, it's like, hey, Larry Summers, you were in the chair in 2010 when the stimulus, it was his fault. He deliberately undersold the stimulus. He had a paper from his subordinate, Christy Romer, that said the stimulus should be like $1.7 trillion. He unilaterally nipped that down to like 800 billion. And the result was the Democrats got swept in 2010. And so I think the argument that if you're coming in on 2021 and the economy's flat on its back, what you need to do is just spend until you get back to full employment. And that's what's going to restore, production. And that's what's going to keep you in office and keep you from losing your majorities. And so I think that, these people are squirrely, but that's an argument that I think they'll really have trouble defeating when it comes down to making, between the transition period, assuming Biden wins, and then the first few months of the next administration. I think there will be a real push to try to aim high, and, fingers crossed.
Well, and now we've seen that the whole faux concern about debts and deficits, has gone by the wayside. Nobody has mentioned that, in the face of this pandemic. And, I think you could make the case that the verge of the depression was here for a lot of people even before this. We should be spending to pull people out of a rut before the rut is here. And in some ways, maybe we were given some headroom to do that by these austerity discussions that were happening, and by the push to keep the debt and deficits lower than, maybe they needed to be. But now we're at a point where we see, okay, spending is necessary sometimes, and it is the way out, and the world doesn't end when you do it. And now let's go ahead and do it as an investment rather than as an emergency situation, and I'm even seeing people like Mark Cuban talk about federal jobs guarantee programs. Everybody's Bernie Sanders suddenly in a pandemic, and there has to be a offense played on that, as opposed to so much defense where we sit around defending ourselves as not socialists. We need to say, no, we're not socialists, and in fact this is the way this needs to go, because it wasn't working, and so many people were in trouble. So I think that's what you're talking about. Maybe there's an opportunity now to play offense and to seize that conversation. And I think that as more and more young people get engaged and run for office, and the AOCs of the world take the microphone the way she has so beautifully, and Bernie, frankly, deserves so much credit for moving the conversation, in these two, over his 40 years, but in these two campaigns especially. We're at a point now where that window, I guess the Overton window, has shifted, and we really have an opportunity here it's not going to happen overnight. And I think anybody that was looking at Bernie's campaign as, the moment, was looking at it wrong. It's a process. It's going to evolve. And, come 20 years from now, things are going to be a lot different. And I think the fear of that from the Republicans is why they're playing so dirty, why the panic has set in, why they're throwing out all of the pretenses, about even pretending to play nice. They're not doing that anymore, because they know their days are numbered. And so I hope that that's the case. And I appreciate your voice in the mix too, because I don't know. I know the Week, is a respected, I don't know what is it progressive or conservative or nothing, but seeing your column in there all the time is really good. So I hope to keep doing that.
Yeah, the Week's they go for diversity of opinions. So I'm kind of the token lefty, and we have a token righty in there, and a centrist guy. but yeah, you in the long term, you look at Bernie's margins among young people. Young people famously don't turn out; they never have in the same numbers as old people. But then you look at Republican margins among young people, and they're bad and getting worse. They've in 2008 they were losing the 1829s badly. They lost them worse in 2012, and they lost them yet worse again in 2016. And the millennial generation, my generation, we're reaching middle age now, and the Zoomers who are coming up behind us are even more left wing than the millennials.
Right.
And Republicans are clinging to this elderly and dying off, literally, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic generation. And maybe they got a few more election cycles left in them, but insofar as we continue to have democracy in this country, it is kind of a matter of time unless something changes very drastically. Because this, people say people always get more conservative when they get older. That's not really true. What happens is people get imprinted in politics, usually in young adulthood, and basically tend to vote, that way for the rest of their lives. The silent generation, the people who voted for the New Deal and Great Society, those people voted Democrat until they died in like 2004, 2008. Similarly, Reagan won young people in 1980. Richard Nixon won young people by a lot in 1972. And those people, the baby boomers, they stayed conservative. Those are the people we're talking about now voting for Trump. And
Right.
so Republicans are they're just frittering away two old generations, and it can't last forever insofar as we still have democracy.
Right. And then what they're probably thinking is, I don't need it to last forever because I'm not going to last forever. So, this is sort of like the last scream of their party, I hope, unless they change drastically. And, young people may not vote, but what they do is turn into older people and then they vote.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
that's what we got to be counting on. Well, Ryan, I don't want to keep you forever. I appreciate you doing this. Please keep up the good work that you're doing. Thank you for your piece on the Postal Service. I think it's really important that we fight for things like that and the programs like that. And more importantly, on a bigger level, make the case that government is not the enemy. Government is how we take care of each other. Too much government is never a good thing. Neither is too little government. And we need a balance.
Yeah.
And I think we're out of balance right now.
I would say you can't have, like, the whole project is impossible of having less government. There's only choices about what the government is doing. Everything that happens in the market is backed by the state.
Mhm.
And so the pot, look at what the Fed is doing to support the stock market.
Mhm.
And so what we got to get our head out of that neoliberal frame to say that more or less government,
Right.
it's about choices, what the government's going to do and who it's going to do it on behalf of.
That's well said. Let's leave it there. Ryan,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. Left Anchor is the podcast, the week at Ryan L. Cooper on Twitter. And I will be following, and maybe down the line in the Biden regime, we can talk about the good old days.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you.
Cheers.